Within the Department of Homeland Security, we've developed what's called a roll-up report. We have about 54 different things that we measure, anywhere from interdictions to drug seized to arrests to prosecutions to those type things. So we do have a matrix that's out there. Before that, we didn't. We were kind of mixing apples with oranges. Every time we testify, you couldn't tell if we're making any progress or not. But we now have a vehicle where we can actually do that. What we have seen with the efforts, again, of putting the Department of Defense resources on the border and all the other support that we're getting, we have seen a drop in interdictions. But that's not necessarily good news. The real story is they're probably going somewhere else, and now we got to find them. So we have yet to see that spike that comes up out there. So there are ways of, again, measuring the effect, but in the world, we were just discussing this on the drug trade, how much drugs are actually getting into the United States, though we know we are actually interdicting, again, what the presidential policy says, 40% of the cocaine that's coming into the U.S. Who measures the total amount? I could tell you it's probably a tremendous amount, because every day I get a document, again, from the Foreign Military Studies folks that show pictures of 20 people hanging from a bridge, dismembered bodies, this, that, and the other, yet the cartels have no problem recruiting. So that tells me there's a hell of a lot of money going that way, and that 40% may or may not be putting a dent in it. We also measure the effect, again, as I talked about, we talked a little bit about the operations and the budget and those type things, that, again, budget cuts are a reality. We have to start looking at better ways, more efficient and effective ways of doing this. One of the statistics that's, I guess, put forth by the Joint Task Force South is the fact that they're interdicting about 20% of what they can actually see that's going on out there. So that's definitely an area where we should step up our efforts again at the interdiction, but that's going to require a more cohesive mission integration plan than we currently have, which we're working on.
Colonel, I'll take a crack at that one also. It sounded remarkably similar to an appropriations question, actually. Mm-hmm. So on any particular year, you know, we can show you the statistics of what was caught, what was intercepted, what was interdicted. However, what's missing there is out of what? How much illicit activity took place along the illicit pathways. And more than ever before, we have a domain awareness now. So knowing that denominator is easier for us. And that is accomplished not only with the increased secure border initiative type technology that's been deployed, but also with being the test bed for some rather important braking technology actually to support the warfighter. For example, on one of Customs and Border Protection's unmanned aircraft, we are demonstrating a brand new technology called VADR, Vehicle and Dismount Radar, basically what it is, before it goes OCONUS. So, you know, before DOD will accept new technology, it needs to be proven somewhere. And this allows us to see everything from, you know, leaves and trees moving in the wind, all the way to more specific, you know, dismount and vehicular activity. So we know much more of what might be getting by, and then can even set up more of a robust defense in depth type of force package.
Did we answer both your questions, Colonel?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We had another question over here. Sir.
Yes, hi. Lieutenant Colonel Mike Hughes. I'm an Army strategist doing a one-year fellowship with Virginia Tech.
You're hired.
Have any of you gentlemen seen any linkage between the transnational criminal organizations and terrorism trying to move across the border?
Is this on the record or off the record?
Yeah. Yes. Again, we know that I know us in the Department of Homeland Security get tired of hearing the intel every day that Al-Qaeda still plans to attack the West. Yeah, duh, got it. So how they plan to do that, they're just like every other criminal organization that's out there. If you think of it as a crime, they're always looking for new ways to get in here. Our challenge is to identify those individuals, stop them as far away from our borders as we can, and make sure they don't get here. But as far as staying on the unclassified side, you know, the amount of people coming in, yes, they're still trying. We do see organizations that are, again, posturing themselves in other countries, again, looking for entry into here. on any given day, I get a report from the intelligence community and the law enforcement community on those individuals that we happen to identify and stop at the airports as they're trying to go, those that we interdict on ships and have taken into custody and turned around, and those types of things. We do have extensive databases on those individuals. They're in the no-fly list. They're in our watch-out BOLO list, be on the lookout for, and those type things. But again, they'll try any way they can to get in here and do that. About the time I think I'm probably a little too paranoid for my own good, I get another report that the FBI has just rolled up another individual who's going to blow up the Federal Reserve with 1,000 pounds of explosives, those type things. So it's not just them trying to get here. There are those who are already here, again, that look to do us harm, and those are the ones that we work with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to identify and stop those also.
And I don't know the number, and you may know the number, but those who are apprehended coming across the borders, they're not all from the Americas. And they're not, you know, I mean, they're from around the world. They have just gotten to the Americas somehow and worked their way north or worked their way south. And it's just at the border is where they finally get picked up because something's wrong with their papers that turns them up.
And to tell you how prevalent that is, I caught two at the border 2 weeks ago. We were down in San Ysidro on a tour, and they were giving me a tour on how they screen the cars, how they screen the commercial vehicles, just like they do at every other point of entry. And as we got to the walk-through line, they were explaining that the individuals are lining up to get into the U.S., wait times anywhere from 15 minutes to 2 hours. And I looked at these two people standing in line. I said, those people are not Mexicans. So Customs and Border Patrol agent went over there and said, can I see your papers? And sure enough, they're Syrians. They were seeking asylum and those type things. So, you know, there are a lot of people coming across the border, and I think to speak to General Mann's point, kind of an example, at my favorite Mexican food restaurant, the two cooks are from El Salvador. There's one from Beijing. There's a couple others from other countries who are out there. So not everything coming from Mexico, not everyone is a Mexican. There are different nationalities coming up. There's a whole continent below us, again, that are moving that way. So.
And the challenges we have on the southwest border, Mexico has on their southern border too, because it's a large, relatively undeveloped region. You have families on both sides of the border. You have commerce going back and forth across the border that's just good, honest commerce. And then you got those other guys who are trying to take advantage of that wide open, undeveloped space for some nefarious reason, or their own, you know, their economic, entrepreneurial skills that may be to the wrong side of the law. So it's a challenge globally with border security.
Okay,
There's two important parts to that, of course, is the people, and then also like a weapon of mass destruction. And CBP employs perhaps the most robust radiological detection network in the country, in CONUS. So our ability to filter out, you know, that needle in the haystack proverbially is actually quite good.
Yeah. And I think at this point, too, it's important to point out that although the Department of Homeland Security, what you see on the surface is we're keeping out bad people, bad things from coming into the U.S., what is equally one of our missions is ensuring that legitimate trade, legal people pass through in a timely manner also, because if we don't, that definitely impacts the commerce of the U.S. and other countries because of our global economy that are out there. So that's one thing, again, that I don't think comes through when the public looks at the Department of Homeland Security. They just see the security side and us keeping people out. But on the flip side of that, we're also, again, getting the legitimate trade through as quickly as we can. If you go to one of our points of entry, you can see that even the number of people that we interdict or send to secondary for drugs or some other nefarious material or nefarious people going through is minimal compared to the amount of legitimate trade and legitimate people that get through or go through the points of entry every day, and also through our airports and those types of things.
Yes, sir.
Hi, thanks for the panel comments on all these topics. I want to know, I'm Joe Marinich of Mutual Link Communications Company, and I understand that there have been several cross-border interoperable communications exercises or projects actually by DHS. And I'm wondering if you could speak to those, and as well, what is being done in terms of military forces, cross-border communications, both interagency, amongst the Homeland Security agencies, and also joint communications that interoperable.
Okay, I'll jump on that one. Cross-border, I mean, when communications as in technical side or relation side? Relation side, I think, has really taken off. We have border commanders meetings quarterly. regular basis, where U.S. military and Mexican, SEDENA primarily on the northern border, have engagements and professional engagements to discuss how we can work together training-wise and support. The CBP participates in a routine process of meeting where it's SEDENA, the Mexican Army, and their local border police, and our JTF North under our North facilitates those meetings, and that's to discuss, training opportunities, to discuss operational opportunities, in a coordinated manner. Technical side, we have just installed 10 cross-border communication stations with the police that tie into our border patrol network, so you can have an exchange now, direct exchange between their regional or zone headquarters and our sector headquarters. So on the technology side, we're working. Big thing is interoperability. As we discuss with FMS cases for the Mexican military along their southern border, they want to make sure Southern Command is buying interoperable systems through FMS for Belize and Guatemala so that those two can interoperate. Last thing you want to do is, Mexico equips themselves with Type A and the other two buy Type B and C, and they can't interoperate. So that great sensitivity to, hey, everybody realizing this is a partnered effort, and we want to enable partnership and enable coordination and synchronization of effort.
We're in absolute partnership with the Federal Communications Commission and also NTIA for, as you know, analog television went away, so a tremendous amount of bandwidth was freed up, and there's a proposal for a 700 megahertz public safety broadband type of a thing. This ties in very closely with what the telecommunication giants in the United States are doing with respect to their LTE, 4G type networks and things. And the international big picture, how's the spectrum going to be split up so as to minimize bleed over and things like that is actively being discussed here in the National Capital Region and then between Washington and Mexico City, for example. But it's the same kind of things that you would find between any two cities and dividing up the spectrum so that a fire department isn't interfered with by the taxi cab or florist delivery truck transmissions.
Any other comments from the panel on that question? Did we answer your question, sir? Yes. Other questions? Sir?
Just curious, taking a shot here, is there any evidence so far the Arctic is being used as a smuggling route for anything, people, goods, or is that a concern for the future?
Fish poaching? Does fish poaching count?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Fish poaching, does that count?
Does in the Caribbean.
I mean, there's a lot of different things are smuggled, everything from freon to
So,
people to drugs and so on.
so that never used to be a problem. And as the northern ice cap has been receding, it's been receding more on the Russian side than on the Canadian side. And you can certainly do, your research just on Google and click the images tab, and you can see how much that's moved. So different sovereign nations' territorial waters start to come into big time play. And I wasn't being facetious when I asked this poaching count. It's absolutely a concern for Norway and Russia and Canada in particular. And then as you cross the pole towards the Bering Straits, then it becomes a U.S. issue as well. In there becomes all of the minerals and mineral rights that could be exploited, illegally exploited by a third country. So yes, it's an evolving problem. Then with that comes any kind of a mishap. So then you have rescues of people in an austere environment. You have oil spills, and who's going to clean it up, and how are you going to get the stuff up there? And there are major considerations.
Yeah, the Arctic, is from an economic development is going to happen. And as I said, Shell Oil went up this summer to do test drilling. They'll go back next summer. Conoco will follow them next summer. So you're going to have some international tension as to who owns the resources up there. And you're going to have those who would like to come in and utilize those resources. There are 8 Arctic nations that sit the Arctic Council, but there are many, many others who have economic interests. They would like to harvest the goods and then sell them on the global market. And so there's maneuvering of, they're trying to get into the Arctic too, so they can, for economic development. More economic development means more people and presence in a harsh, austere environment, more probability for something to go wrong. You think of the Italian cruise liner that hit the rocks. Well, okay, we don't need a ship that big up there, but you get a ship up there with 100 tourists who want to go look at the polar bears, and they bump an iceberg, and now they're starting to take on water. How do you get to them and get them out? And the technology may be there, you know, the challenge is communicating up there, but we will eventually get that word, and it will be a challenge to get up there and get them off. And that's one of the things we're thinking about is what is the proper investment, some of it commercial, some of it military, for the Great North. Because ultimately, we will be operating up there more, and we mean collectively the populace will have a greater presence up there. And so we need to be thinking that way now so that we prioritize investments and start making those investments in a prudent manner as we go into the future.
If there's open shipping lanes, it stands to reason there could be smuggling.
It could be. There's no protocol today for a ship that crosses through the Bering Strait to tell anybody, I'm going up there. So, I mean, the numbers the Coast Guard tells us that it's a positive trend on a graph of activity. Is kind of like we talk about the drugs. We don't know who actually went up there, because these are the guys we know about, but there's no requirement to call District 17 and say, I'm entering the Arctic, I'll call you when I come out the other side on X number of days.
The shipping companies have told us that they've done the analysis and taken a ship over the top now with, for example, Chinese exports to the European market is 40% less distance than either coming through the Panama Canal or around the southern tip of South America. 40% less. So from an economic model, you know that will be exploited as quickly as possible.
Okay, did we answer your question, sir? Okay, and again, if you're asking a question, give us, you got to speak up a little bit or give us time to make sure everybody hears it. We don't want to leave anybody out. Next question, sir.
Neil Anderson, Northtown. For the most part, and Director Chavez, you mentioned the global security plan, but for the most part, we've talked about as is. So, given resources, authority, what's the next step from for your individual perspectives, and what are the barriers, obstacles that are today, and what are you going to do for the next step to achieve the next level of cooperation, the next level of success?
Well, a lot of people see the budget cut as kind of as a bad thing, which it is, but it also has some pluses to it. When the Department of Homeland Security first stood up, we didn't have to do a lot of mission integration with anyone, because if we needed it, the budget was there to support us, and we always got more budget money. So as the budget again has stabilized, and as it starts to go the other way and we start to lose budget share, it's forcing us to do things more efficiently and effectively, which is again the mission integration piece. So as we look into the future, how do we do things more efficiently, effectively? It's that integration of, again, all our partners who are out there, but what part do they play? Where do they fit in? What do you do so I don't have to do it? Those types of things that we're looking at. And I can see that's the only way that we're going to be able to provide for, again, the safety and security of the homeland out there is to approach it from that direction, because the days from the budget projections I've seen for 15 or FY14 and FY15, the sequestration rate continues to climb. So we're losing more and more money, again, driving us to the integration of all our missions that are out there. I think what it also will drive us to do is collectively set the priorities for the nation. What are we going to pursue? We can't pursue everything. So what are those priority missions that will give us the most bang for the buck? General Fraser and General Jacoby and I talked after the last interdiction committee meeting on what are the common, if you're looking at the broadest look or the look from as strategic as you can get, what are we really trying to do? And it's interdict the pathways and also throw the networks off. If you just interdict the pathways without affecting the networks, you're standing at the border catching everything as it comes in, and those production lines are still going to be out there, so we have to hit it on both sides. The pathways are being used by smugglers from everything from narcotics to humans to counterfeit goods to those type things. So if we interdict them air, land, and sea, then again, I think we've done that. But no one organization can do that, and no one organization's, again, going to have the budget share to actually perform that mission. So collectively, we've got to work together as we have been, but I think that effort needs to be put together in some sort of plan, not individual plans that are out there. And we need to start looking at it as more of a global issue versus just the homeland and kind of working out from there.
Yeah, and to jump on that, you know, we have a tendency when budgets cut to draw in, kind of become isolationist across agencies and departments of, that's not my core mission, so I'm not going to do that for you. And if you flip it the other way and say, are there things I can do with you, for you, that are supportive of my core mission? And I can derive goodness out of doing this with you. And so collectively, your 48 cents and my 62 cents is a better investment overall for mission, purpose, and training in state. And I think that's the way we got to look at it. I use the children's analogy of the story of stone soup. You throw the carrots in, I'll throw the onions in, somebody else throws a piece of meat in. We get a pretty decent meal. And I started, all I had was the pot and the need, so to speak. I think if we approach it collectively, because it is a critical mission set, then how can I gain from supporting your mission towards my mission requirement? I go back to, we're going to pay guys to play interagency at the national training centers. Why not go work with the interagency and do something in a real mission?
Was that the Army version of that story? The Air Force version is, I have the filet mignon,
Yeah.
you have the lobster tails.
Any other comments from the panel members on that question? Okay, any other questions? Sir?
My name is Gerald Van Ness. I'm with IHASBOT from Michigan. I'm wondering about the threat for Michigan from the Mexican drug cartels, terrorism. Are they coming across the Canadian border, coming into the Great Lakes, or are they coming other ways, or what's the threat for Michigan?
John, you want that guy?
Sure. So in 1999, we certainly saw and documented a case where a radical person attempted to come to America with a trunk full of explosives through the Blaine crossing in the state of Washington. And thanks to the U.S. Customs inspector on duty that night, things just didn't seem right, and questions weren't being answered correctly, which led to an inspection of the vehicle and the discovery of all these explosives. The person claimed to want to blow up the Seattle Space Needle and to then continue on to Los Angeles International Airport and blow that up. Now, I would first observe, if you're a construction engineer or an explosives expert, you know, there's formulas that you should use to determine how much explosives you need. And there was a problem with the math. If you've ever been to LAX, you also know that LAX isn't a single thing. It's several different terminals. It's a tremendous infrastructure, and it would take more than a trunk full of, you know, Chevy Caprice or whatever was the vehicle. I think it was a Caprice. It's going to take more explosives than that to make any kind of a dent at LAX. Be that as it may, the immigration laws in Canada are not the same as they are in the United States. So the presence of people that could or would do the United States some harm, you know, is certainly possible or documented. Therefore, the watch along the northern border is just as robust as it is on the southern border. In terms of the people who man the ports of entry, the people who are between the ports of entry, looking for nefarious activity and to find the bad people and bad things. At the same time, the trade relationship with the United States and Canada is second to none. And the importance, you mentioned Michigan, so I'll hammer the point home. The Ambassador Bridge, the Windsor Tunnel are two examples of critically important infrastructure that allows the just-in-time deliveries to the U.S. automotive industry, for example, to operate. So both the United States and Canada and CBP and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and CBSA on the Canadian side have robust working relationships and partnerships. we're actively looking for those bad actors that you ask about. I hope that answered your question.
There's a great book called Last Call, written about prohibition, if you want to understand the challenges of the northern border, and working against organized crime and networks back in the 30s. Little anecdote, the president actually considered sending the military into Detroit and declaring martial law because Detroit had gotten so out of control with crime and violence. But we work very closely with RCMP. We work very closely with the Canadian government. The no-fly lists, there's not perfect alignment of what we consider as a no-fly characteristic and the Canadians consider. But there is that coordination back and forth and discussion. And it's a greater border, and it's an unpopulated border. I mean, you can see the pockets of population in Canada. But it's through collaboration and partnership that, we're going to ensure each other's security, and that's North America's security. You can go to the law enforcement and they'll tell you, they can show you threads of connectivity between gangs in American cities and cartels from Mexico or Central South America. They can't show you where those threads are being pulled and controlled, but they can do the network diagram and show you that this element, this gang in St. Louis has relations, either the product flows from this group in Honduras or Colombia. So the networks are there, and you have to put pressure on all elements of the network if you're going to solve the problem and ensure security. And so I commend the book to you, Last Call. It's very interesting. It talks about prohibition and how we got to, how we went after it and the challenges we had as a nation in enforcing the law.
And we're getting better and better. Our relations, again, with Canada and the other countries out there are, I guess, from the Department of Homeland Security perspective, being integrated more and more every day. We do have what's called a Maritime Operational Threat Reporting or Response board that meets. It was primarily made or set up to coordinate with all the interagency partners on a maritime threat that would be coming to the United States. Canada has now joined us in the motor process and will be part of that from now on as we talk about threats that are inbound to the continent. So every day we're expanding more and more our partnerships, our capabilities looking beyond us, because we realize if it gets to our border, it's too late. We should have been able to do something or interdict farther out. The farther out we can do that, the better we are.
Okay, we have another question in the back. Sir?
Yeah, Tom Baldwin, General Dynamics, from the northern border. You're going to be rolling out RBSS and IFT in the southern border in the next 2 or 3 years. Any similar plans in the northern border for a program like that?
Could you spell out those acronyms just for some of the folks in the audience that...
Integrated fixed towers is a competition ongoing right now, along with a remote video surveillance system. These are two competitions ongoing right now for the southern border. Anything similar for the northern border planned over the next few years?
Go, John.
If you're offering to start a Christmas list for me, I have a lengthy list. And the short answer, without being flippant, is yes, absolutely. Now, in this budget-constrained environment, the actual rate of acquisition and employment, is yet to be determined. I'm sorry, that's the best I can do.
Yeah, and again, I heard it alluded to also with the unmanned aerial systems that are out there. I'm actually on the board with Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Donovan, Administrator Huerta from the FAA. They're looking at that. It's a lot of times the tools are out there, we have the technology, but one of the issues we're looking at right now is the privacy issues associated with all that surveillance equipment we happen to be putting out there. If we're in another country, we'd have no problem whatsoever. But as we're finding out with every surveillance system that we have out there, there are 4 criteria that we're trying to meet. One of them is the credentialing of the operators who are out there. Are they certified to do that? Are they qualified? One of them is the platform, specifically with the unmanned aerial systems. Is it airworthy? So there are tests for that. Again, with the unmanned aerial systems, they're looking at do we have procedures for you applying for the airspace that you're going to use for the amount of time and those type things. And the fourth one is what are the privacy issues and legalities associated with that. Secretary Donovan and I, we have UAS systems that we operate within our departments, so we're familiar with all those issues that are out there, but that just takes care of the government side. There's also the commercial side that FAA is trying to write the regulations to, and the private side. for remotely controlled aircraft. If you do put a camera on one and you're a citizen just flying around, what are the expectations of privacy, or can you even put that camera on top, or any type of surveillance equipment on top of remotely controlled aircraft? So again, a lot of it is, okay, yes, we'll buy, again, according to the threat prioritization that we have, we'll put the resources out there depending on where we think the threat is going to come through based on intelligence and those types of things we use to make decisions. But there's a lot more to it than that. We can't often just stick it out there. Border regions along the southwest border, it's pretty remote, as is the northern border up there. But again, different rules apply and different issues out there.
Okay. Other questions? Anyone? Yes, sir.
So related to your question, also for NORAD and the panel, we see UAS as a force multiplier, capability that hasn't been fully exploited in the homeland. What about the enemy? The natural enemy is going to exploit that technology against us in terms of the lowest slope threat. In a limited context, can you talk to how you see that coming and how do we see it counter? I know it's probably more than just an unclass discussion, but to the extent that you address it, sir, I appreciate it.
So we've certainly experienced aerial smuggling for decades. Certainly the pathways, similar to my southwest border chart, there's some great graphics that capture the first marijuana, then cocaine trade that left South America and came up to the Bahamas and even into South Florida directly in the 70s and 80s. Speaking of books and movies and things like that, Cocaine Cowboys is a very interesting one that properly captures at the time Vice President Bush under Reagan, who later became the president, Bush 41, and the whole issue with Dade County and things like that. So aviation smuggling is certainly not new. Where aviation smuggling is taking place has morphed, just as my southwest border chart displayed. The type of aircraft that are being used and in an attempt to evade has also changed. I think General Baldwin mentioned the light aircraft, the ultralight aircraft that are currently, motorized kites, but it's manned aviation. It's a matter of time before there's a commercially available enough easy unmanned aircraft to exploit the U.S. defenses. I'm very pleased to tell you that NORAD Northcom has a robust military radar infrastructure and command center. So does CBP. And they collaborate every single hour of every single day and share data feeds back and forth. And in a three-way cooperation between the Department of Defense, CBP, and the FAA, they're able to sort traffic, and then, if necessary, General Baldwin also mentioned the launching alert aircraft and so forth and so on, whether they're state aircraft, whether they're part of the DoD Title 10 defense network, or whether there are aircraft. We respond to those things. At the end of the day, then, whether it becomes manned or unmanned is sort of irrelevant. We found it in the air domain picture and then responded to it.
I think the unmanned aerial platform is the most recent new challenge in the third dimension. Difficult to see because of size. Difficult to determine intent of it. We have a standing restricted airspace in the capital region. You don't come into it unless you come into it through proper corridor and proper procedure. We had, about 90 or 120 days ago, 2 radio-controlled airplanes that were picked up by the network. We responded to them, determined what they were, observed them, saw them go to ground, and then local police authorities went and investigated. And it was 2 guys out there flying their radio-controlled aircraft of size. Okay, they weren't your tiny ones; they were pretty substantial. But it's a challenge to deal with. I go back to, you got to see it, and then you got to respond to it, and then what's the right platform to respond to it? An F-16 tends to go a little too fast for the average UAV. So do you rely then on a helicopter? We're in discussions right now pursuing maybe something in between a turboprop fixed wing that would be the low, slow response airframe. Along the southern border, the ultralights, I've seen some videos of them. These guys literally are flying lawnmowers. It's pretty amazing, and they don't always land. Saw a video of a guy, and he looks like he's wearing his skin diving mask. He's actually got a set of nods on, and he's flying this thing. He crosses the border, he reaches down to some sort of lever, and you see a big bundle fall off the platform, and he turns around and he goes back south. So how do you respond to that? Do you chase the guy down? And we have procedures for dealing with a rogue aircraft, and we have our, how do you determine hostile intent or hostile criteria, and then what's your response? Observe until he goes to ground, and then you're talking to law enforcement to try and intercept him, or do you take some sort of action? So it's a challenge to thought through. But the UAV, on one hand, it'd be great to be able to fly them and assist, because it's relatively low cost when you compare it to a large fixed-wing aircraft or rotary aircraft. On the other hand, you know, you got safety in the airspace that you got to be concerned about, because you don't have a head swiveling. All you got is that little video eye. And then, you know, what are the controlling aspects of who can have them, who can use them?
Okay, we have another question, sir?
Jay Rasmus, the National Guard Bureau. In 2010, the President authorized temporary use of National Guard forces on the southwest border, and it's been renewed a couple of times, reduced in 2012. And my question is, what do you see as the future of that, the long term?
I think we did it. Northcom got a plan order from the Joint Staff to develop a long-term vision for support to border operations. We worked on that this past spring. We submitted it in September back to the Joint Staff. And you know, our inclination is there is a support role for DoD forces to support law enforcement along the border. And we recommend inside that we would use JTF North as the central focal point for planning coordination of those operations. And then we would utilize, you know, it'd be a total force solution. As requirements were passed to us by law enforcement, they'd be racked and stacked in coordination with DHS, and then given resources available, who's available to support, starting with the National Guard along the border states, and then working your way to Title X capability and forces. So, I mean, as I said, there's opportunity there. It benefits us in training respects, it supports a real mission, and it helps a partner agency.
As you know, the funding source is absolutely critical in determining an answer to your question. Because whether they're state funds, whether they're federal funds under Title 32, whether it's an activation all the way into Title 10 type orders with National Guard troops and so forth, it's a complex question that has many answers to it.
Yeah, and that's a much easier question to answer from the Department of Defense than or Department of Homeland Security than when I had to answer it in the Department of Defense. But from the Department of Homeland Security perspective, we don't care. We just have a requirement. How the Department of Defense chooses to fill that requirement is up to the Department of Defense. So we don't get into that argument. We just know we have a need.
I think the most important thing is whatever we decide we're going to do, we do it in a coordinated, coherent, and integrated manner. So all agencies get the biggest return on the taxpayer's investment.
Other questions? Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. The gentleman, Jim Deere with Nice Park, support the Defense Forensic and Biometric Agency. How important is the use of biometrics right now for security missions, and how do you see future exploitation of that capability as we move forward?
We're exploiting that to the max extent possible. Anybody can use any name at any given time. The determining factor is what we call the +1 data. Anybody can fake a birth date, a document like that. So really, in order to know who you are definitively, it's that biometric data that helps us out the most, which is the fingerprints, the retinal scans, all those type things. So we are pursuing that, like I say, to the max extent possible. We also see the other challenges gathering that biometric data. A lot of procedures we have now, they will collect the name, they will collect a photograph, they will collect anything other than fingerprints. So we're trying to get that as a standard procedure amongst all the agencies, not just Department of Homeland Security, but Department of Justice, Department of State, all those, to collect that biometric data, put it in a database that's accessible by all the law enforcement agencies, so we don't have to do a query every time. We can just do a federated search and again catch the bad guys as they come in. We do have a program, it's called Operation Janus, where we look at individuals who have been coming into the country or tried to gain access to the country using false identifications or different identities and those type things. And we've been successful, but the only way we've been successful is to positively identify, again, the individual based on the fingerprint number that we get. So yes, it's very critical to us.
Okay, we had another question back over here. Yes, sir.